Good morning and welcome to the G21 2020 Virtual Stakeholder Forum. My name is Geoff Russell and it's my great honour to be your Master of Ceremonies for this virtual event this morning. I'd like to start this morning's forum online with the traditional Welcome to Country, performed by Corrina Eccles, Wadawurrung woman and traditional owner, supported by Gavin O'Shaughnessy on the didgeridoo. Thanks, Corrina.
Wadawurrung Marub. In Wadawurrung language, I say Wadawurrung spirit. May we acknowledge the first mother tongue, the first footsteps, the first peoples to walk, care, talk, connect, and take care of land, country, and each other. The spirit of the Wadawurrung people, my ancestors, elders, and family. I acknowledge Bunjul, I say Yatni. I thank him for the creation of this beautiful land, country, water, all things living, and our people, and our connection to our Kulin nations. I acknowledge all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people that are listening today. I acknowledge I am standing on Wadawurrung country, the beautiful country of our saltwater country, our freshwater country, our mountain country, the country of my people, my ancestors, for thousands of generations. I acknowledge Stan Grant, listening today, talking today. I say Yatni for his contribution, for people to understand our culture, our place, our connection, and our journey. I'll now welcome you all with the mother tongue spoken by the Wadawurrung people to welcome you all to these beautiful lands, Wadawurrung country. Nora Urin, Nara Corrina, Bengik Makbarin Wadawurrung Bagurk, Yatni Bengik Wadawurrung Guli Bagurk, Marub Bengodingadak Wadawurrung Jayu, Kumaring Ja Nubich Yaluk Ba Wuri Naru, Yatni Bengik Geelong Muan Wurik Muriu, Yatni Gav Miriu Nich, Yatni Bengadak Karing Galabu Murub Bonju, Karing Galabu Wadawurrung Ja Kulin Ja, Yatni Bengadak Mundigurk Ba Wuring Guluk Munya Miriu Ba Kulin Munya, Gimbani Wadawurrung Ja Kardiniu Bengadak Gayupangut Ma Nich Wadawurrung Miriu Kulam Wadanich Miriu Wari Ba Wuru Ra Gayupangut Ma Wadawurrung Ja Kimbani In Wadawurrung language I say, my name is Corrina and I am a proud Wadawurrung woman. I acknowledge and thank Wadawurrung people, their connection to Wadawurrung country, continuing care of our land, waters, rivers and sea. I acknowledge the mother tongue of my ancestors that I speak to you all today, to welcome you today. I thank Gavin alongside me today. We thank our Creator Spirit Bonjul for creation of Wadawurrung country and our connection to the Kulin nations. I thank elders, men, women, past, today and future. I welcome you to this beautiful place here, a place where we'll see Meyrick, our sunrise, a place where we see our mountain country. Welcome, welcome today to Wadawurrung country. Gulbada, take care.
Fantastic. Thank you, Corrina, and thank you, Gavin, for that traditional welcome to country. Always a very emotional celebration. This morning we have over 500 delegates joining us live online via the web, and I'm delighted to see you all, even though I literally can't see you. We're broadcasting, if you like, from the Geelong Library and Heritage Centre on level 5. It's a beautiful day outside in Geelong, so wherever you are joining us this morning, I hope it is for you too. We have a number of VIPs joining us online this morning who I'd like to acknowledge and thank for their company as well. Our federal MP, the Honourable Libby Coker, and our state MPs, the Honourable Darren Cheeseman, the Honourable Christine Cousins, and the Honourable Andy Meyrick. Also, I'd like to welcome our recently elected mayors and councillors from across the G21 region, and their CEOs and executive staff from all of those councils. Welcome. I'd also like to welcome the newly elected chair of the G21 board, Councillor Stephanie Asher, and her board members. Welcome to you as well. I mentioned we have 500 delegates watching today. Normally I'd be talking about housekeeping rules, but I presume I don't have to tell you where your toilets are or where your emergency exits are or what to do with your phones. What I would like to tell you about, however, is that this is a free event in recognition by G21 of the very tough year we have undertaken together as a community, and this is G21's way of thanking you and offering this as a free event. However, free doesn't mean free of costs, and G21 would like to proudly acknowledge the support of partner organisations who have financially covered the costs of today's event. Our major sponsor, of course, is Urbis. So we thank Urbis for its participation and for sponsorship of our keynote speaker, Stan Grant. I'd also like to acknowledge Regional Development Australia, Barwon Southwest, the Geelong Port and the Times News Group. I mentioned Stan Grant, our guest speaker, and to introduce Stan, I would like to firstly introduce a former work colleague of mine, a brilliant guy, Nat Anson, who is now the Director of Urbis here in Geelong. Nat, welcome.
Thank you, Geoff, and good morning, everyone. I'd like to start by acknowledging an enormous contribution of Elaine Carbines and Bill Mithen in their leadership of the G21 Regional Alliance. We also congratulate Mayor Asher on her appointment as incoming chair and look forward to working with you and the G21 board in the years to come. Elaine is an inspiration to us at Urbis. We hope to play a small role in filling her shoes by contributing thought leadership to the G21 region towards a thriving future. Urbis is Australia's preeminent planning and property services firm, with over 600 planners, designers, economics and real estate advisors throughout the country. We're now proud to call this region our home, with a dedicated office in Little Mellop Street to serve the Barwon Southwest region. We're excited to build on our recent city-shaping projects that include Geelong Arts Centre, Epworth Geelong, the redevelopment of GMHBA Stadium, and of course, Geelong's new growth areas. We look forward to contributing to regional growth and economic development in 2021. My colleague, Kate Meyrick, will address you on our collective opportunities in the G21 region later in this morning's program. We acknowledge the Wadawurrung people as the traditional owners of country we meet on today and pay respects to their elders, past, present and emerging. Urbis is excited to partner with Wadawurrung on projects throughout the region, including our joint cultural placemaking event as part of Geelong Design Week 2021. On behalf of Urbis, I'd now like to welcome our keynote speaker. Stan Grant is a Wadawurrung and a Kamilaroi man, a journalist since 1987. He's worked at the ABC, SBS, 7 Network and Sky News Australia. From 2001 to 2012, he worked as a CNN anchor and senior correspondent in Asia and the Middle East. As a journalist, he has received prestigious international and Australian awards. In 2015, he published his best-selling book, Talking to My Country, which won the Walkley Book Award. He's also won a Walkley Award for his coverage of Indigenous affairs. Stan's much-anticipated follow-up book, Australia Day, has recently been published. This is an extraordinarily powerful and personal book about reconciliation, the Aboriginal struggle for belonging, and what it means to be an Australian. In 2016, he was appointed to the Referendum Council on Indigenous Recognition. Stan is a Professor of Global Affairs at Griffith University and International Indigenous Affairs Analyst at the ABC. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming our keynote speaker, Mr. Stan Grant.
Thank you so much. It's lovely to be here with you. And I also want to pay my respects to well, I'm just hearing myself back. I think there may be, is a microphone open there? I'm hearing an echo. Ah, that's better. That's better. Are you still hearing me? Can someone give me a thumbs up if you're hearing me, because I was hearing myself back on a loop. Yep, okay, you're hearing me. That's great. All right. There was a little bit of an audio issue. I was hearing myself back. I think there was an open microphone there that was picking me up and returning it back to me. It's okay. For you to hear my voice, I don't want to hear myself again at the same time. Let me pay my respects to the Wadawurrung people as well. In our language, Wiradjuri language, Yinjamara, respect to you and your people. I also want to acknowledge the people on whose land I'm speaking to you today from, and that is the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and also to respect my own ancestry, Wiradjuri, Gumbalroy and Daryl peoples as well. I want to speak for about half an hour or so today, and then to take some questions from you. And really, I wanted to focus on the state of our world. As you just heard in the introduction there, this has been, and we all know this has been an extraordinary year, something that was unexpected and that has certainly turned our lives upside down. We're still wondering exactly what the world will look like when we get to the end of this. It's also revealed, I think, some fractures that were in our world, and perhaps we weren't as fully aware of them as we should have been. And it's accelerated, I think, some trends that were emerging in our world that we didn't necessarily think that we would have to deal with so quickly. Prime Minister Scott Morrison, I think, summed it up best recently when he described the world that we are entering into now as one that'll be poorer, more disordered, and more dangerous. He said it takes us back to the 1930s as an equivalent time when we saw so many moving parts in our world, geopolitically, socially, and historically. I think you could probably even go back a little bit further than that. I'd go back to the period of 1913. If you imagine 1913, it was a world then that people talked about as a world of globalisation. It was a world of increasing free trade. Germany and the United Kingdom were each other's biggest trading partners. At that period, they were celebrating a long peace, a period of global peace and global prosperity, and how quickly that all unraveled. Right up until the outbreak of World War I, people were still saying that war could not happen. And of course it does. The great Australian historian Christopher Clark, now working and living in the United Kingdom, wrote a remarkable book, Sleepwalkers, where he talked about the weights being put on the scales and that those weights increasingly tipped the balance until war became something that was unavoidable. And a stray shot and the killing of an archduke led to a global conflict, the worst the world had seen up to that point. The war to end all wars, they called it, World War I. My family, I'm sure the families of people watching today, were involved in that conflict. A great uncle of mine lies somewhere in the fields of France, an Indigenous man who signed up to fight for Australia, who died on the fields of France and whose body was never returned back to his home. It was a war that reshaped our world, and as I said, was seen then as a war to end all wars. Sadly, it didn't. As we saw, the world plunged into more disarray. There was a depression, of course, in the 1920s that led to a rise of fascism across Europe in the 1930s, and then back to war again in 1939. I often wonder when I look at the state of our world today and overlay to that period, I'm often struck by how similar things appear to be. Of course, if you look at the last 20 years of our world, a world that very much defined me as a journalist at a period of the world where I spent largely overseas reporting so many of these big changes. From the period of the attack on the World Trade Center, which led to the wars of Afghanistan and then Iraq, to the global financial crisis, which plunged the world into depression, not just recession. Australia fortunate enough to avoid the worst of that. But you also see the rise of a new power in China, and then, of course, the outbreak of coronavirus. And if we go back to 1913, what do we see? We see a rising power in Germany challenging the existing power of Great Britain. We saw, of course, World War I, but then we saw the Spanish flu, and many have made analogies to the Spanish flu and the impact it had on the world and the impact of coronavirus today. There was the Depression of 1929, as I mentioned, and we have the global financial crisis of 2007, 2008. Of course, they had war, First World War and the Second World War from 1939 to 1945. And of course, we've had unending war for the past 20 years in Afghanistan and Iraq that has spread to other parts of our world. As we saw a rise of fascism across Europe in the 1930s, so in Europe today, we have seen a return of fascism. We have seen a return of extreme right-wing parties, some of whom now sit in the parliaments of Europe. And it is redefining the politics of the region. And of course, there is the rise of China, which is reshaping our world in ways that we still don't know. I spent 11 years living and reporting in China, 4 years in Hong Kong, 7 years in Beijing. And I saw a country that when I was a boy was a country that was commonly referred to as the sick man of Asia, a country that could not feed itself, a country that during the Great Famine saw up to 40 million people die of starvation, and a country that emerged from a cultural revolution to reopen to the world and is now an indispensable nation. It is the biggest engine of economic growth in the world, surpassing the United States. By the end of this decade, it will likely be the biggest economy in the world. And we know that with economic power goes political power. It has transformed the lives of ordinary Chinese. More than 500,000 people have been lifted out of poverty in a period of just 2 decades. It is Australia's biggest trading partner and one of the significant reasons that we have avoided the worst of the Asian financial crisis of the 1990s and, of course, the global financial crisis of 2008. It contributed to an extraordinary run of economic growth, 30 years of uninterrupted economic growth in Australia that was only then, of course, broken with coronavirus and the impact that has had on our world. It can largely be said that China, in broad economic terms, has been good for the world. It's certainly been good for Australia. But we know in the Chinese Communist Party, you were dealing with an entity that, while it has opened up to capitalism and market reforms, it has steadfastly rejected liberal democratic change. In fact, under Xi Jinping, it has been seen to have taken a more authoritarian turn. There is no doubt about that. I experienced several years of living under the Xi regime, and I saw just how significantly things started to change on the ground. As a reporter, it was so much more difficult to do our jobs. We were constantly harassed, constantly dealing with interference and obstacles, on several occasions being arrested and detained, on other occasions actually being physically assaulted. My family was constantly under surveillance. Our home and office were bugged, and our telephone calls, of course, would be listened into by the state. It was very, very difficult to operate, and it was a much more repressive regime. There is no doubt about that. At the same time, of course, we've seen a crackdown on Uyghur Muslims, up to 1 million now being held in detention in China, that human rights groups talk about in terms of brainwashing camps, that they are not merely just detention, but some form even of ethnic cleansing. We've seen, of course, the ongoing occupation of Tibet and the detention of Tibetans, and we've seen, of course, the crackdown on democracy protests in Hong Kong. China presents two faces to the world. Yes, a much more authoritarian face at home, as Xi Jinping centralises the control of the Communist Party, as he seeks to maintain the Communist Party's role in Chinese life, right at the very centre of that life, as he continues, in his words, to create a harmonious society, and if necessary, that means a harmonious society by force, while at the same time opening up to the rest of the world. China, of course, is a permanent member of the United Nations Security Council. It is a member of the World Trade Organization, the World Health Organization. It is a signatory to international covenants like the Paris Climate Accords. And, of course, with its Belt and Road Initiative, is looking at opening up pathways of investment and trade that stretches from China across Central Asia through to Europe and into Africa. Its presence and its influence is being felt in our region, particularly among Pacific Islands, where it has invested significantly and built stronger person-to-person and country-to-country ties. So it has been a remarkable period to see that change take place in China, and it was a privilege for me as a reporter to be there and to see that firsthand. Just an extraordinary period of our history. But of course, in the past week, we've been reminded of just how far our relations with China have plummeted. Right now, there is talk of a new Cold War, that at this moment, Australian government ministers cannot pick up the phone and talk to their contemporaries, their counterparts in the Chinese government. That's a remarkable situation when you consider that Australia has played such a pivotal role in what has been a reopening of China to the world. We don't have, at this point, an Australian News Bureau operating in China. Again, an extraordinary thing when you think that Australia has had a presence there dating back to the 1970s. We now no longer have a news bureau in China. This period, of course, coincides with a return of what is seen as great power rivalry. That for the first time since the end of World War II, but certainly since the end of the Cold War and the demise of the Soviet Empire, that there is a viable alternative to American power, that the era of American hegemony, a global order led by America, is being challenged by a country that is economically powerful and steadfastly illiberal and steadfastly not democratic as we would see it in the West. In 2017, the United States declared China a strategic competitor. It said that China and Russia represented the two great strategic threats and security threats to the United States. Since then, we've seen a trade war between the United States and China that cost both countries, but significantly, I think, cost the United States 200,000 jobs were lost directly as a result of that trade war. We know that China is extending its reach within our region. It has claimed and indeed has militarised the islands, the disputed islands of the South China Sea, and that is in defiance of a ruling by the Maritime Court in The Hague. This period is an extraordinary period where the world is going through a moment of transition. The relationship between China and the United States, or China and the West more broadly, is always going to be the defining story of the 21st century. I think we have got there a lot sooner than we would have anticipated. Under Deng Xiaoping, the Chinese leader who opened China up to the world, who undertook that extraordinary period of economic reform, who once declared to a country that had been steadfastly a communist country that to get rich is glorious, to embrace market reforms led to a rapid change inside the country. Deng Xiaoping used to talk about China hiding and biding, to hide its ambitions and to bide its time. I think we can safely say under Xi Jinping that the period of hide and bide is over. And that is presenting enormous challenges, particularly, of course, for Australia. It's long been said that Australia doesn't have to choose, that we can have our key strategic relationship with the United States, but we do not have to have that relationship at the expense of our trade relationship with China. I think we've seen in recent times that we're no longer in a position where we necessarily can avoid making those choices. The United States is our great ally. It's a country with which we share democratic values. It has guaranteed the peace of the region and security for Australia. And clearly that is our closest relationship. Yet at the same time, when 1 in 5 Australian jobs is directly linked to exports, we can't ignore the relationship with China either. China is by some way our biggest trading partner. Each year about $140 billion of trade. The next closest country is Japan, and that's around about $30 billion. That gives you an indication of just how important China is to us. Now, of course, we can look in retrospect and we can say that perhaps we should have seen this day coming. Chinese Communist Party was always authoritarian, ruthless when it needed to be. This was a nation under Deng Xiaoping who ordered the People's Liberation Army to shoot and kill their own people, Chinese people, in the protests at Tiananmen Square. We've always had to balance both our interests and our values in navigating that relationship. Coronavirus, which of course came out of China and has turned our world on its head, has, I think, hastened so many of these issues. China has emerged from coronavirus, what Xi Jinping called a people's war. He says in a much stronger position. China is expected to grow post-COVID at around about 8% next year. That's economic growth that still far outstrips the major economies of the world. And of course, with Australia emerging from recession as a result of COVID and the COVID lockdown, we depend inevitably on China's growth and the strength of that growth to drag our economy along as well. And yet, as we've seen during this past week, the relationship can be poisonous. Indeed, it can be toxic, and that raises real questions for how we go forward from here. The Biden administration potentially offers an opportunity for a reset of the relationship, which had made a downturn during the Trump years. But if there is one thing we know about American politics, is that there is bipartisanship when it comes to the approach to China. Both the Republicans and the Democrats see China as not just a competitor, but a country that is potentially a threat as well. Joe Biden has described Xi Jinping as a thug. That's going to make it difficult to be able to repair those relationships. Do we enter a new Cold War period of trying to contain China's rise, as we saw during the Soviet Union, with efforts to control or contain the Soviet Union? Perhaps, but that's going to be much more difficult than it was during the Cold War against the Soviets. The Soviets, for all of their military might and control of parts of the world, were not as economically interconnected with the world as China is, and certainly not as indispensable to global economic growth as China is. Now, while there is a Western alliance broadly that the United States can call upon, China is not without its own friends, even if they are not full-blown allies. But certainly it has grown closer to Russia. Vladimir Putin and Xi Jinping spending much more of their time together and sharing a lot of similar ambitions. There are close ties with Iran, with Pakistan, and of course, a nuclear-armed North Korea. China's influence, as I said before, extends very deeply into Africa as well. This is not a situation where we can simply surround China and isolate China, because China cannot so easily be isolated. So what are we left with? We're left with, I think, what Richard Nixon faced in 1972. 1972 was the height of the Cold War. It was also the height of the Cultural Revolution. Relations between China and the United States were in the deep freeze. But Richard Nixon and Henry Kissinger got on a plane, went to Beijing and sat down with Mao Zedong. That led to a period of restored relations, which ultimately led to the opening up of China, and a meeting that you could absolutely say did redefine and change our world. Richard Nixon described it at the time as a voyage of philosophical discovery. How do we take that voyage of philosophical discovery today? How do we approach efforts at a rapprochement with China, where we know that there are just stark divisions between our countries and that relations can increasingly turn poisonous? How do we break through? Are there opportunities to be able to work together? One of those opportunities may in fact be climate change. We know that under the Biden administration that they will rejoin the Paris Climate Accords. We know that he's appointed John Kerry to lead as an envoy for climate policy. And we know that China has declared that it wants to become carbon neutral by 2060. That creates an opportunity for two big powers, the two biggest powers of the world, to work together on something of common interest and of vital importance to the world. It may lead to an opportunity for a reset. They're the opportunities we need to look for now as we try to strike this balance between our interests as Western liberal democratic nations and the undoubted importance of China to the world, a country that rejects a lot of those Western liberal democratic values. It's going to require compromise, and it's going to require pragmatism and a degree of diplomatic skill that we haven't necessarily seen evidence on all sides in recent times. It's going to require extraordinary leadership, but the stakes are incredibly high. We know that some are even talking about the prospect of war, of potentially a global conflict that ignites between the two great powers. 5 or 6 years ago, it was something that was described by the RAND Institute, the RAND Corporation, which looked at what a war with China would look like and described it then as thinking the unthinkable. The unthinkable today is improbable, but it is not impossible. And of course, it can rapidly escalate, just a miscalculation, the wrong signal, a misunderstanding can so easily light a spark for a conflict that could rapidly get beyond our control. That's the world that we live in. We live in a world where authoritarianism has been increasing, and we live in a world where democracy has been in retreat. In 1989, the American political scientist Francis Fukuyama penned an essay called The End of History. He saw the Berlin Wall coming down, and he saw the triumph of liberal democracy. The great ideological struggles, he said, were over, and there was one ideology left standing. Within a couple of years, of course, of the fall of the Berlin Wall, we saw the end of the Soviet Empire in 1991. And there was a flourishing of democracy throughout the world. But it was not the end of history. In 1989, while the Berlin Wall came down, of course, the People's Liberation Army opened fire on their own people in Tiananmen Square. Within a couple of years of the Berlin Wall collapsing, we saw the invasion of Kuwait by Saddam Hussein, something that reshaped the Middle East and has led to unending conflict that Australia itself has been involved in. We saw, of course, the war in the Balkans, a war that was fought over identity. And we've seen a return of identity and history that has reshaped our world and made it so much more flammable. This is the world that I reported on. Too many times I've stood in marketplaces after suicide bombings, seeing blood on the ground so thick that I could taste it in the back of my mouth, and watching mothers picking bits of burning flesh out of shrapnel holes in the walls and putting it into plastic bags because it's all they have left to bury of their children. War is real, and it can happen, and it has a devastating human cost. And that's the challenge for us all now, how to return our world to a world of prosperity, peace, and an order that preserves that prosperity and that peace for all. Democracy has been rapidly retreating since the end of the Cold War. Freedom House, which measures the health of democracy throughout the world, now says that for 13 years we've seen declining freedom, declining democracy. There are fewer democratic states today in the world than there were a decade ago. Things that, of course, are the cornerstones of our democracy, like the freedom of the press and rule of law, are also in retreat in parts of the world. Our democracies are fractured, and the soft guardrails of our democracy are weakened. And all of this at a time when we face the biggest challenge, I think, to a democratic order, and that is a rise of a truly authoritarian capitalist state that is indispensable to our lives. So what does this mean for us in Australia? If you look at the US election this year, you see a country that is so bitterly divided, a country that in many respects refuses to be governed. One half of the country not accepting the political legitimacy of the other half. In Australia, we avoid the worst of that. We are not a country given to extremes. Our democratic processes, our electoral processes, the fact that we have compulsory voting inoculates us against that effort to get out the vote that can be so poisonous, that can pit people against each other, and that can lead to a greater political tribalism. Because we have a strong social safety net in Australia, and because we have strong institutions, we know that we don't have the left behind to the same extent that, of course, we see in places like the United States. We've seen with the COVID outbreak, and of course, how devastating that has been for America, how well we have handled that, how our government was able to support people through the worst of it, and how our health system and our institutions were able to come together and develop protocols that have largely kept us safe. And I know that you in Victoria have dealt with the worst of it, and far more than I have in New South Wales. But we have emerged from this comparatively stronger than other countries. And yet, to finish up on, before I go to some questions from, we have the legacy of our own history to deal with. And we have deep questions about our own political processes and the legitimacy of our nation. It is a fault line that I have navigated all my life. I was born into an Aboriginal family in 1963, living on the margins of society. My mother and father were itinerant workers. We moved from town to town, looking for work, looking for a way in, dealing with the legacy of our history. People who have been forced off our land, people who have been rounded up and put onto missions and reserves and segregated from society, often brutalised. We are the products of the frontier wars. Those things live very deep in our memory. When I was a boy, I grew up with the stories of my people, keeping those stories alive. My mother and my father telling us about our history and what had happened and how we had endured and the sacrifices that we had to make. As a young boy, to have imagined that I could be here talking to you today, to have imagined that I could have spent 20 years reporting the world, to have imagined that I could have seen the end of apartheid in South Africa, a peace deal signed in Northern Ireland, to have seen Hong Kong handed back to mainland China, to have stood in the Oval Office with the first black president of the United States, Barack Obama, to have seen Xi Jinping come to power in China would have been unthinkable. We lived an itinerant, poor and black life. I moved schools so often that I barely had time to get what we'd see as a conventional education. I changed schools at least 12 or 13 times before I was into high school, and I went to another 5 high schools after that. But Australia offered a way forward for us, even in the worst times. And yet for Aboriginal people today, my people, despite the opportunities that I've had and other Aboriginal people have, we know that we are still the poorest and the most imprisoned people in our country. We know that in some parts of the country we have youth suicide rates that are among the highest in the world. We know that Aboriginal people die 10 years younger than the rest of the population. When I travelled the world and I saw the worst of the world, people would tell me that Australia was the envy of the world. It is a place that people come to for a new beginning. And it is a remarkable country. But it is a remarkable country that still in so many ways fails the people who have paid the greatest price for all of the incredible achievements of Australia. That is our unfinished business. That is the test of our democracy. At a time when the world is going through a period of great introspection and inflection, where we are wondering about what a post-COVID world will look like, people in Australia have had a little bit of an experience this year of what life can be for Aboriginal people every day. That in COVID, with that insecurity, worries about our future, joblessness, economic concerns, and of course, deep health concern. We know that Aboriginal people who deal with chronic illness, early death, intergenerational trauma and unemployment deal with those things every day. Surely that leads to a greater kindness and an empathy. Surely there is a commitment to hold on to the values that are most important to us, to be able to build a better world where people are not left behind, where we respect each other and the values of a liberal democracy are cherished, and we try to build a world on those values. This is the challenge of our times. It is the challenge for great leaders. It is the challenge for great thinkers. It is the challenge I pose to all of you watching this today. What do we do to make a better world? What do we do to make a better country? How do we navigate a period that is the most dangerous period the world has seen since 1913, 1914? Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure to be able to spend this time with you, and I want to take some questions. I hope you've got some questions to ask. Thank you so much.
Stan, thank you so very much. We've not met. I'm Geoff Russell. Welcome to our forum this morning.
Nice to meet you,
so
Geoff.
much for your incredibly erudite, personal and extraordinary presentation on a geographic, historical picture of where we are today and how we have arrived here. For those of you watching, I hope you've enjoyed that. If you'd like to ask Stan a question, we do have a few minutes only. Post your questions in the chat button at the bottom of your Zoom screen and we will try to get to some of those. Stan, I guess for many people watching here today, and this may sound very selfish when you've been talking about a very global picture, but for those of us watching across our little region of southwest Victoria, we grow grain here, we produce incredible wines, we have a tourism industry that's based on international visitors, we have an education sector that is heavily dependent on overseas students, particularly from China and Asia. How do you see their future over the next 12 to 24 months if you had the crystal ball in front of you?
Yeah. Well, I don't think we even need the crystal ball, to be honest with you, mate, because I think if we look at the situation right now, we can see what that's going to be. This has been a really rough time. We know that people are paying a price right now. Look at our wine growers, our shellfish farmers, our beef and barley exporters. People are already paying a price. This is a really difficult period. I fear it will get worse before it gets better. This is an existential moment. I think the Prime Minister captured this when he said that the reason China is focusing on Australia is because who we are. And I think there is an element of truth to that. We represent a liberal democracy that China instinctively, the Chinese Communist Party rather, rejects. But at the same time, I think, Geoff, we have to understand the view from China as well. I understand deeply what has shaped modern China, a deep sense of their own humiliation. You'll hear it often talked about, the 100 years of humiliation, how from the Opium Wars of the 1840s and the invasion of Britain, the loss of Hong Kong, the occupation by the Japanese, occupation by Germans, by the French, there is, until the Communist Revolution, it was 100 years of China that had been used to seeing itself as the centre of the world, as an increasingly weak country and occupied and humiliated by the West. That burns deep in the Chinese soul, and Xi Jinping talks about that a lot. It requires us to understand how they see the world, to accept that morality is not just a one-size-fits-all, that we can have relationships of interest even though we don't necessarily share values. It is a deep, deep challenge for us. But sadly, I think things may deteriorate further before we are able to right that.
Stan, last night on 7:30 Report, you were talking with Stephen Fry. You talked about...
That was fun.
Yeah. You talked about new tribalism and the rise of right-wing. You hinted on the demise of democracy, a theme you've picked up today. A question from one of our viewers today is, how can we protect democracy here in Australia?
Yeah, look, it's a great question. I'm of the view that tribalised identities tear at the fabric of democracies. For a democracy to work, we need first to be able to say we as a people. Now, we are all different, but we come to this differently. We have our different histories and our different cultures. And I think in a multicultural country like Australia, the ability to be able to preserve and protect and cherish those things are central to our sense of self and our identities. For Indigenous people, we have our identity, and that's often been in conflict with what we see as Australian political liberalism. So we need to be able to square that circle. We need our institutions to be robust. We need our democracy to be accountable and responsible. And if there is one thing I would say, Geoff, and I would say this, we need to finish the unfinished business of our country, that we cannot continue to have this divide between us as Aboriginal people and non-Aboriginal people. Victoria is going through a process of negotiating a treaty. Treaties matter. Acknowledging our past matters. Building stronger foundations of governance that lead to better outcomes matter. And it means that we can feel a strength of being a part of this country and being able to say we and not us or them. And that's critical.
Indeed. And that leads us directly to the next question from our audience. Stan, what are your current views on the Uluru Statement?
That's a great question. I see the Uluru Statement as a lost opportunity among many lost opportunities. It was a remarkable document that, I was thankful to be involved in as part of the Referendum Council. For Aboriginal people for whom liberal democracy was designed to exclude. Remember, when the Constitution was written, we were not counted among the population of Australia. For Aboriginal people to have endured that history and to say that Constitution, that founding document of Australia, can represent us, it can speak for us, that we can find a voice within that, I thought that was remarkable. What an incredible show of love and belief in the strength of institutions and foundations of our nation. Just an absolutely remarkable show of forgiveness and strength and love for our country. Now, of course, it wasn't embraced, and we're still going through a process of trying to design what the next iteration of that looks like. And, I wish all the people well in that. I think it occupies two things in our history. One, it's a symbolic moment, a symbolic gesture of being able to deal with the legacy of our past and to recognise that and to recognise Aboriginal people. Beyond that, it's also an opportunity to build better governance, to have Aboriginal people have greater input into policy that leads to arresting so many of those horrible statistics that we know plague Aboriginal people still in Australia today. I hope it's not lost. I hope that moment of, when it wasn't fully embraced, leads to something that is much more amenable to many more people, and something that is ultimately more productive. I think we need to be pragmatic in our world. We need to be pragmatic, and we need to look for outcomes. And hopefully this is an opportunity that leads to better outcomes.
Stan, thank you so much. Unfortunately, time has beaten us. There are many more questions we could ask you. We could stand here all day and talk about these issues.
I wish I could. I've loved this.
Thank you again for your time this morning. It's been fascinating. It's been stimulating. Please continue your excellent work. I'm a big fan, okay?
Thank you very much.
So keep up the fight, okay?
Thank you
For your time again today, Stan.
In my language, we have a word, mandangur, that means thank you. And we have another phrase, yinjamara winangana. Yinjamara winangana means to live with respect in a world worth living in. That's what you're doing here today. You're helping to build a world worth living in. Thank you so much.
Fantastic. Thank you again. And thank you again to Urbis, our key sponsor for today, for assisting G21 to bring Stan Grant to our forum for 2020. I'd now like to re-welcome Corrina Eccles to our forum. Corrina, as I mentioned earlier, is a Wadawurrung woman and traditional owner. She's here live at our venue, and via Zoom, I believe from Tasmania, Sarah Eccles, who's Country Plan Project Officer, and together they're going to tell us about the Healthy Country Plan. Over to you, Corrina. Thank you.
Mariani, thank you. I'd just like to acknowledge G21 for giving us this opportunity to officially launch our country plan. I'd also like to take this opportunity to acknowledge the hard work of Elaine Carbines with G21 over her journey here in this region and how strongly she's advocated, and wish her the best in her retirement. Our Healthy Country Plan has been a long time coming. I want to acknowledge the family that have contributed and come together for over 2 years to be able to bring this plan to you today. But it couldn't happen without having the strength of a Wadawurrung woman, my cousin Sarah Eccles, who has conquered the journey to be able to collaborate, bring us all together to officially launch this plan today. So I'll introduce Sarah Eccles, Wadawurrung woman.
Yeah, Kaz, thank you, and for your spirited welcome this morning. Thank you, Stan, also for your contributions and your words. I'd really like to echo what my cousin said. I think for us in launching our Wadawurrung Country Plan, this is really our story of how we want to see this country come together, have practical outcomes on the ground for us. I acknowledge that I'm presenting not from country, my own country, but from Palawa country. And as a Wadawurrung woman and the Wadawurrung Country Plan Project Officer, I really want to thank the G21 staff, organisers and alliance members for this special opportunity to launch and share an overview of a video of our Wadawurrung Country Plan. I want to acknowledge all the leaders and guests online with us today from government, business and community organisations. And I want to acknowledge Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander community members joining us. I've had the privilege, as Corrina has said, to work with my Wadawurrung elders and community members to support the creation of our country plan. And I really acknowledge my people's and community's efforts in doing this. We are proud of what we have created and to be sharing our country's dream in self-determining the future we collectively want, in seeing the lives of our people improve, in keeping our country healthy and our culture strong. We know there is much work ahead as a community to achieve this, but that this is a journey together with G21 members. If you have any further questions or are interested to know more about our country plan, please contact the Wadawurrung Traditional Owners Aboriginal Corporation or go to our website where you can download the plan. Gobata and enjoy.
Miwam Bangirek, Kinkembil, Wordy, Darung Guli, Wadawurrung. In Kalingo, Ik, Kimbane, Guli Barung Wadawurrung Ja. Gayumpan Wadawurrung Ja. Wadawurrung Ikuliwa Ja. Halit Jara Ja. Kimbane Wadawurrung Ja. Wadawurrung people, through Wadawurrung Traditional Owners Aboriginal Corporation, have developed a healthy country plan. It tells of our collective dream for the future of Wadawurrung people and country, identifying what we all share as important and what are the challenges for keeping Wadawurrung country healthy, what is making country sick, and what we need to do to change this. The plan identifies our future Wadawurrung caring for country aspirations and interests. It is a 10-year strategic plan that guides Wadawurrung people and partners in our goals, strategies and actions in looking after our culture and protecting our plants and animals, and importantly, our Yuluk waterways, be it the rivers, wetlands, underground water or wari, our sea and coastal waters. Looking after Jar, country, in a way that promotes Wadawurrung connection, cultural practices and knowledge. Wadawurrung country currently stretches from the Great Dividing Range of Ballarat to the coast, from the Werribee River down to Mangawak, Aries Inlet, including Geelong, the Bellarine Peninsula and the Surf Coast. The plan covers all of our country as our boundaries are currently defined in our registered Aboriginal Party boundaries map. Our country area is likely to change as treaty and other land and water negotiations progress. Our JAR covers 10,000 square kilometres or 1 million hectares, with the majority, around 80% of country, in freehold and 20% Crown land. Wadawurrung's collective dream is where our people are strong together, with our children growing up proud being Wadawurrung. They are leaders in looking after country and have equitable access and decision making for their country. A future where our waters are healthy, where our native animals, bush foods and resources are in abundance. The plan helps share our story and support our staff working in the corporation and in the field to promote Wadawurrung aspirations and interests, helping us in our communications and negotiations with the many land and water management authorities and organisations with responsibility in our country. The plan is our roadmap of achieving our dream for country of Wurrugawilwa, Gumpa, Bengerek, Wadawurrung, Wurrung Bap Jar. All people working together to make Wadawurrung country and culture healthy and strong. All our country is culturally important and interconnected, but the plan helps us prioritise the important things we most need to care for. These important things we call values. They are Wadawurrung culture and people, Wadawurrung cultural sites and places, our bush tucker, medicines and resources, our enterprise and employment, our rivers, estuaries and wetlands, our inland country, our coastal country, our sea country, and our native animals. In looking after these values, we are working on the threats to them, the problems we want to stop or reduce that are causing harm to our values. Urban development, lack of coordination between land managers, lack of recognition, lack of capacity, sea level rise, rising sea temperatures, water extraction, inappropriate location of wind farms, inappropriate visitation, vandalism, cinnamon fungus, bushfires, weeds, rabbits, foxes and cats, and drought. Over the past 5 years, the Wadawurrung Traditional Owners Aboriginal Corporation has had significant growth in looking after cultural heritage and providing cultural services. Our country plan builds on this work to further guide and grow our caring for country activities. Our country plan is focused on 3 programs. Within these programs are goals and strategies for working together to strengthen the health of country, people and our culture over the next 10 years. Gobata Bengere Jara, looking after Wadawurrung people and culture. Building on the success of our cultural education services, we're expanding our cultural education program that shares our unique culture and language with the public, particularly within schools. We are developing further resources like our phone language app to support the use of language as a basis for teaching and sharing culture. Working closely with stakeholders at planning stages, we are seeing language names and cultural stories for place return to country, integrating culture into housing estates, buildings and signage, further strengthening everyone's understanding and connection with the cultural landscapes they live within, and celebrating Wadawurrung culture. Warragawilwa Wadawurrung Corporation, strengthening Wadawurrung Traditional Owners Aboriginal Corporation. We are strengthening the capacity of Wadawurrung Traditional Owners Aboriginal Corporation so we continue to have the right people with the right knowledge and skills across generations to support us to care for country. We will increase the number of staff, projects and income to do the work on country to realise our vision and goals in this plan. The country plan is being used to progress our land rights and recognition negotiations, supporting our people in developing businesses that share and look after culture and country, reinforcing our cultural responsibilities to care for country, and ensuring future decisions about our country are made by or with traditional owners. Gobata Ja Bap Nibe, caring for country. This program focuses on addressing the threats to our core values of country. It will see increased access to country by Wadawurrung people through co-management and management of public lands and land acquisitions. The development of a Caring for Country team that will focus on services that care for our land and waters, that will lead our fire management and cultural burning, our cultural site maintenance, and pest, weed and animal management. Today, we share our country with many others, and we want you to walk with us in looking after country, to value it and understand how much we respect and care for it, as many of you do. To do this, it is important that we build good, strong partnerships, that we work with others to help them understand our cultural perspective, to value our country, and how we can together care for it. It is the strength of our old people, our Wadawurrung ancestors who have enabled us to survive. It is continuing the foundations, the knowledge they have given us, walking in their footsteps, in their spirit that we carry on, caring for country. Galing Wada now. Nakne. Let's walk together. Thank you.
Thank you, Corrina and Sarah, for that very thought-provoking presentation. Well done. It's next my great honour to introduce recorded messages from our State Premier, the Honourable Dan Andrews, and followed by the Leader of the State Opposition, the Honourable Michael O'Brien.
It's a pleasure to be with you all for this year's G21 Stakeholder Forum. 2020 has been a year like no other, and our lives have changed in many ways. But as the year closes out, we can look ahead to our state's recovery and begin the work of repairing our economy. That means supporting families and getting thousands of Victorians back into work. It also means building a transport system Victorians can rely on. That's why we're investing $2 billion to start work on the Geelong Fast Rail. It'll mean faster trips, fewer stops, and most importantly, more time spent at home. We also want to get visitors back to your beautiful part of the world. So we're investing $465 million to restart Victoria's visitor economy. That includes $28 million in tourism vouchers for regional Victoria, attracting visitors back to the region, and in doing so, backing local business and communities. We're also delivering $255 million for improvements along the Great Ocean Road, making sure this iconic stretch of road remains safe for future generations. And finally, this year has shown us just how much home matters. That's why we're delivering the biggest ever investment in social housing, with $215 million invested across the G21 region alone, giving thousands of Victorians the stability of a home and thousands more the security of a job. The road to recovery is just getting started, but our government is committed to working with local communities to help meet local needs. The work of G21 is a big part of that, and I look forward to continuing our partnership. Stay safe and enjoy the forum.
Hi, I'm Michael O'Brien, Victorian Liberal leader. Thank you to Elaine Carbines, CEO, and the members of the Geelong Region Alliance Forum for the invitation to address you today. Well, 2020, certainly not the year we'd hoped for, and Victoria's faced many challenges, and we know we have many more ahead. Throughout 2020, the Liberal Nationals have listened to and advocated for Victorians. There is no question that our state has been hurt badly by the second wave of COVID-19 and the harsh lockdowns that resulted. 800 lives lost, 20,000 infections and 200,000 jobs. While the state government must be accountable for what went so wrong, we must also focus on bringing Victoria back to life. Today, 1 in 5 Victorians are either out of work or can't get the hours they need. Now, this isn't good enough. We need a positive vision for our future, one that provides opportunity, backs initiative, and offers hope for a Victorian comeback. In October, the Liberals put forward a plan to get Victorians back to work. Our plan particularly focuses on supporting people, particularly younger people and women, to get their jobs back, as well as supporting small business to recover. We know that confident consumers and confident small businesses are key to our revival as a state. The Liberal Nationals want to focus on shovel-ready projects over the next 2 years to immediately boost employment and get our economy going, not pie-in-the-sky projects that seem to be favoured by the current government. Victoria is so much bigger than Melbourne, and Geelong makes a vital contribution to our economy, and it needs support and deserves investment. We have a road for recovery for highly impacted areas like tourism and hospitality, as well as bringing manufacturing home to Victoria. The Liberals also want to see domestic and international air services restored for Avalon Airport as soon as possible to encourage tourism visitation back into Geelong and the southwest. Our plan includes funding to attract new events into the region, and we believe $400 million should be provided next year to upgrade tourist attractions across Victoria and promote investment in tourism infrastructure, which is so critical to our revival. Our plan calls for the fast tracking of projects where funding has already been allocated, such as new and upgraded schools, emergency services and health infrastructure like the Torquay Community Hospital. Now, forums like this are absolutely crucial for community consultation and involvement. We all have a stake in getting Victoria back to work and rebuilding from the devastation of this second wave. Thank you all of you so much for your hard work and for continuing to support the great Geelong region.
I'm told that our next speaker thinks at 1,000,000 miles an hour, that she's a real live wire. So I'm really looking forward to this next presentation. It's Kate Meyrick, who's Urbis's Director of Future State. She's joining us online live from Brisbane. Couldn't get a flight down this morning, I understand, Kate. That's fine. She's going to present on a mission-fit G21. Go for it, Kate.
Thank you so much. And thank you also for the invitation to share some of our future thinking about future fitness this morning. And I really do apologise that I'm not with you in person. A very special birthday actually prevented that, and it's mine. So many apologies. Thanks for that. Next slide, please. So the 21st century is the time of global paradox, and it's a time when our cities and city regions are seeking very powerful solutions to seemingly quite contradictory pressures. So balancing the urgency of needing greater economic competitiveness with the absolute imperative of social equity and climate change. And whilst we work on simple responses to these very complex challenges, there's one thing that we really do know about the future, and that is that city regions will matter more than ever, but not all are going to succeed equally. So today we're going to look very briefly at what makes a city region fit for the future, the characteristics of success, and how our city regions, very specifically Geelong and the G21, measure up. Next slide, thanks. So a fundamental marker of future success for our city regions is how well the urban core, or the city area, and the regional community that surrounds it actually work together. Those city regions that understand this interdependency, that are really well connected and work seamlessly as one social and economic unit, will become the leaders of tomorrow. Those that don't will simply fail to optimise their potential. It's really quite simple. Those city regions with acumen will act now to consolidate their competitive advantage and create next generation value. Thanks. Notwithstanding COVID-19, the universal reality is that by 2050, more than 70% of our world's population is going to live in a city region, and about 80% of global GDP is going to be created there. In Australian city regions, we actually face some common challenges, and whilst the great human migration to our city regions is undeniable, we're also facing the challenge of declining productivity per capita, which does actually threaten the way of life that we currently enjoy and we leverage as a competitive advantage. We just need to do a whole lot more with less if we want to maintain our current quality of life and the way that we choose to live in our city regions. Currently, much focus is being placed, rightly so, on planning for post-COVID recovery. So how can we best plan for this post-COVID recovery in the context of accelerating long-term success for our cities and our city regions? At Urbis, we've been doing some Generation 6 city research, and the project revealed to us that cities and regions that succeed in the future may not be the same cities and regions that have succeeded to date, partly because the markers of success are shifting considerably. So consequently, we developed this Mission Fit framework as a predictive tool to help us to understand how well our Australian cities and city regions are actually positioned to succeed in the future. Unfortunately, today's a little bit like speed dating, so we're not going to have time to take you through it in the greatest of detail. And I'm just going to step you through the architecture really quickly so you can understand some of the commentary. So the scorecard has 6 different domains. I like alliteration, so they all happen to begin with a P. So people, talking to the talent, the well-being and the inclusion of the region. Planet, obviously talking to how well it's able to ecologically support us and what its resilience looks like. Performance speaks to its economic performance. Positivity, a little bit of a cheat really because it means confidence, speaks to how does our external market position, how are we positioned for success in the future with regard to our brand, if you like. Power is really a way of thinking about governance. And at the end, place really refers to the natural assets and the urban places that we've got to leverage. The most important thing is that cities function as a series of systems that all connect together. So the 51 independent indicators that underpin our metrics actually work together. In practical terms, that means if you get an investment in one of our Ps, say you put an investment in people, it actually has a ripple effect across all the systems in your city. But conversely, if you've got one of your domains that's not working so well, it actually has a negative drag effect that brings all the other down. This means if you ignore some of the warning signs, you do so at your peril for future resilience, success and appeal. I always feel like there should be a little bit of a drum roll as we get to the scores. So what we've got here on the screen is a really quick snapshot of how both Greater Geelong and the G21 region as a whole are performing. The score is actually out of 10, but we've expressed your overarching score as a percent. And just a couple of things to note. When we talk about Greater Geelong, we're obviously talking about the city core. But when we talk about the G21 region, we're talking about the whole of the G21 region, including that city area. I guess what's quite a good thing here is that we're not seeing a massive disparity between the score for Greater Geelong itself and the score for the balance of the region. And this is a really good thing. But there are some distinct areas in which the two scorecards don't align. Let's just talk a little bit about people for a second here. So reasonable score on people, not stellar, but actually tracking along quite nicely. And pretty equal score for the city and the region, but for different reasons. A couple of things that I thought were standouts was you have a really high score for social capital. So you're coming across as a very friendly city, a very friendly region where people are supportive of each other. Something that did concern me a little bit, however, is that your educational attainment levels are perhaps not quite as high as I would like to see. And that's a particular concern outside of the city core, where we've still got a number of people who are not leaving school with year 12 qualifications. Another thing that struck me is that we need to put a little bit more focus on the actual physical health of our community. So very high rates of lifestyle disease, including obesity and diabetes. So I'd like to see over the next 5 years those scores firming up a little bit. I feel we should be aiming at around 7.5. Good score when we got to planet. Score for the city, particularly good. Your renewable energy per capita was a standout, and lots of improvement in air quality over the last 5 years. However, in the region, I think it's really important to point out that the score is held back by your over-reliance on car as a form of transport. So unfortunately, congestion, emissions, travel times, and also the fact that there are many short trips that are undertaken by car does exert a bit of a drag effect there. So there's room for improvement. When we look at performance again, one of the things that holds you back is very low GRP growth rates per capita. So I'd really like to see a bit of improvement in that. Also an innovation score outside of the city area that's pretty low, and a knowledge-related score that's not as high as I would like it to be, but is better than it was when I looked at the five-year period 5 years ago. So as we think about this in an overarching sense, I'd like to see a little bit of closing the gap between the city and the whole of the region there. In terms of positivity, the story is actually the other way round. So a good visitor economy in ordinary circumstances is helping the whole of the region, and also a standout for improvement in nighttime and evening economy. So good news in that regard. And also the research agenda of the university is really boosting the score. So this is a very positive marker to see. It's one of the new markers of success. So a great score in terms of positivity is really setting you up well for the future. Similarly, power and governance, pretty good score for the city and the region, very impressive, largely built on the fact that you've got good long-range vision and great institutional networks. So organisations like the one we're benefiting from today, really starting to power you ahead. But in closing out, I think we do just need to have a little bit of a word here about place. And the place score for the region is actually amplified by the collection of fabulous natural assets that you've got, the coastline, the Ramsar wetlands and so on. But the place score for the city itself is held back because although we've had really good progress made with the waterfront and we've got some great civic assets, we're actually not seeing the urban quality of place and appeal that we're going to need to start to support a stronger lifestyle and competitiveness for the city as we move forward. And this is one of those examples where a low score in place actually in the future has quite big implications for the score in performance and the score for people. So this is an area I feel we need to focus on. Because we're a very competitive nation, people always like to know how they've done with respect to their competitor and comparator set. So here you can see Geelong set against some of the other gateway cities that you may often compare yourselves to. So this is a comparison of the city against the other cities. I also popped Melbourne in there, and the good news for Victoria is that Melbourne topped all of the Australian cities with a score of 82%. And you can see yourselves there on the same scale with a score of 68, only ever so fractionally behind Newcastle and well ahead of Toowoomba, Wollongong or the Gold Coast. Now let's just flick quickly to the regional comparison, and here I've been able to pull together scores for the G21 region with regard to the Hunter and South East Queensland. And you can see that you do somewhat lag the South East Queensland score, but this is heavily supported by the fact that we have more than one city within our region to contribute to our overarching performance, but well ahead of the Hunter. So let's just think about some ideas that we may want to develop for the future. And I've split these into ideas for the city versus ideas for the remainder of the region. I think that focusing on the grit, the grain and the green for the CBD area is really important. Similarly, fostering a walking and a cycling culture is going to make a big difference. Perhaps one idea to throw into the mix is a chief entrepreneur to build your spin-off startup and small business energy around the city centre and the balance of the region. And perhaps from the perspective of immediate recovery and thinking about your undoubted creative industry credentials, how do we have a First Friday programme that celebrates film, food and fashion in the city one Friday of every month? If we were thinking about those, you're a bit quick on the finger there. If we were thinking about those 5 to 10 year imperatives, the two things I would really encourage you to think about in the city, if you want to see your score amplified quickly: quality of the urban experience, quality of the local mobility networks. So let's turn now quickly to the region. You're already ahead of me. The absolute critical message here is that you need to invest further in the talent and the well-being and the wellness of local people. And equally that we need to really think carefully about the intra-regional connectivity and mobility. And whilst I welcome hearing the Premier talk about the faster rail connection, it's also really important that people from the regional area can get to other regional communities and into the urban core as rapidly and efficiently as possible. I'd like to see you build a little bit more urban experience outside of Geelong City itself to match your undeniable natural assets. And I really would like to see you leverage the competitive advantages and find that Industry 4.0 sweet spot. I think one of the other things that's really interesting is you've got the UNESCO City of Design designation, which at the moment to me seems to have lacked momentum a little bit. And I would like to see that driven out more strongly, not just in the city, but across the region as somewhat of a unifying force for the way that you live and the identity that you represent to the world. And I also think that you've got this huge opportunity as we start to open up borders to capitalise on all of the energy that you've got around your natural assets and way of life and creative expression to build the staycation and domestic visitor experience. So if we were thinking about 5 to 10 year imperatives for the region, I really can't emphasise enough that connectivity is going to be fundamental to your success. And if we don't work out these transport solutions, we're going to find it really hard to capitalise on some of our other advantages. And the second thing I'd like to see us think about is how can we build our own talent base and how can we attract and retain a talent base that we need to fire up that Industry 4.0 knowledge sector opportunity and build our economic diversification story. Because ultimately we should have far more confidence in the brand that we've actually developed as a region and a city. Thank you. So let's move to the last slide. And I guess this is just a little bit of a call to arms, really, that you have got some really firm foundations to build future success as a region. And the time has come now to stop hiding a light under a local bushel and start to tell that story really confidently, because the marker of positivity and success and the ability to leverage the assets and the advantages that you actually have is going to be the firmest foundation you've got for the future. If you would like to have any more information, because I recognise that was a really quick whip around, very happy for you to contact Nat in our office down there in Geelong. And I really hope that when we come to this time next year, I'll be able to join you in person. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Kate. That was wonderful. And Nat was correct. A million ideas at a million miles an hour. Well done. For those of you who are a bit sort of overwhelmed by that data or would like to digest it at a more digestible pace, just a reminder that today's whole event is being recorded and you'll be able to watch that on the G21 website within about 24 to 48 hours once it's been placed back up there. So go to g21.com.au and you can rewatch or recommend this to colleagues who might not have been able to watch it live this morning. Now, our annual forum would not be a forum without a panel, and today we have assembled 3 intriguing guests, each from a very different sector, to talk about the impact of COVID-19 on their respective sectors. So firstly, I'd like to introduce and welcome live on Zoom streaming, Felicia Mariani, who's CEO of the Victorian Tourism Industry Council. Welcome, Felicia. And here with me at the library in beautiful downtown Geelong, Professor Iain Martin, who's the Vice-Chancellor of Deakin University, and Joel McGuinness, who's the CEO of the Geelong Arts Centre, just across the road from us. And a fair bit of activity over there at the moment, Joel, with works underway.
All going on.
Good work. Felicia, we might just start with you. I'm wondering, as many people would be, what has been the impact of COVID-19 on the Victorian tourism sector, but more particularly here on the G21 area of southwest Victoria.
Yeah, it's, I guess, well, first of all, thank you. And thank you so much for having me today. It's a pleasure to join you for this very special event. I have to say, this is probably, I think all of us would agree, a year we'd like to forget. It's been one of the most challenging and indeed devastating years for our industry across the board. And as we sort of step out of this, as we start to take some of those early steps on the road to recovery, it's not coming a moment too soon. By and large, our industry has been shut down for the last 9 months, really. This, and I have to say, this actually did start, I think we forget sometimes that for tourism, this trouble, this difficulty actually started well before COVID-19. So the bushfires presented a challenge for us that started at the end of December, early April, and we actually rolled straight into COVID implications at the end of January when the Chinese government first shut down their borders to outbound group travel. And they basically closed off Chinese travel, which of course is critically important to the G21 region, as it is to all of Victoria and all of Australia. So that was the beginning of our stepping into this crisis. And that only got worse, as we know. We rolled through lockdown 1.0 and then here in Victoria, lockdown 2.0. So it's been quite traumatic for the industry. Overall, I think it's probably important to note that the projections early on were that we would probably lose in the vicinity of over $23 billion from our visitor spend here in, basically in the whole of Victoria. And let's put that in perspective. Our industry was worth at the end of December about $32.5 billion, and we were projecting that we were going to lose $23 billion off of that spend. I think the other point that's really critical to note is how important domestic travel is to recovery. Victoria was actually losing as well $1.44 billion per month by not having any domestic travel. So that means interstate and intrastate, which was shut down here in Victoria for much longer than it's been shut down in other states. So the recovery will be long, it will be challenging, but I think one of the things that we are starting to see is, particularly in our regional areas and particularly in the Geelong and G21 region, we are starting to see those blossoms of recovery. There was a great pent-up demand for all of us here in Greater Melbourne who were locked down for, 112 days. It felt like a lifetime being here. So, the cabin fever was on overdrive, and we're starting to see the fruits of our being able to get out and travel. So that's been a real positive. But, the implications will be far-reaching, and we're not out of the woods yet. These are some early kind of early blossoms, as I'm calling them, of recovery. But I think we have a very long road to still travel, particularly in our events area. And it's great to see you there, Joel, because I know you'll have a lot to talk about in that space. But yes, I think it's going to need the industry working very much in collaboration, shoulder to the wheel, and everyone pulling together to ensure that Victoria's recovery is actually as quick and as effective as possible.
Okay, thank you, Felicia. Iain, let's pick up with the national tertiary education sector on the same theme. What's COVID done to that in a nutshell, but more particularly, what's it done for Deakin?
So there's not really an element of our university that's not been touched by COVID. It's impacted on every one of our 70,000 community students and staff in one way or another. But to talk specifically, 17th of March, we pivoted to 18,000 students online to 64,000 students online. We did it all again in mid-June, early July. That's involved a whole lot of adaptation, reflection, working in different ways. Now, there are bits that we'll keep, but there are bits that we'll be very glad to forget and move on to next year. So it's had a huge impact on our education mission. Research and innovation, some areas we were able to keep going right the way through. We never shut our campuses, but there is a lot which involved interaction with people where it just stopped for a year. So there's been a big impact there. A lot of the sort of the partnership development, working with international partners, we've pivoted to online. It's been different. So in terms of, there's not really an area that hasn't touched, but I'll pull out international education because it's the one that's probably had the most publicity and probably is the one thing that acutely has had the most impact on the sector this year. So Deakin has about had in 2019 about 26% of its students were international, so that's about 15,000 students. A quarter of them from China, a quarter of them from around the world, and about half from India. From the time that the guillotine came down on international arrivals, we've clearly not had another student start. So that means we've got about 2,000 students less this year internationally than we would have had. And the challenge for us is, even if we bounce back quickly next year, the pipeline impact of that goes on for 2, 3, 4 years. But we're not going to bounce back quickly next year. I think that we're planning on maybe about 30% of internationals commencing that we might have had, 50% the year after, 75%. So you're building out a pipeline to 23, 24 before we really think we'll get back to. It's not only going to be about travel. There's going to be economic impacts globally, which are going to impact on that. There's going to be impact on the desire to travel. I hesitate to talk about money because our international partnerships, our international education brings so much more than revenue. But to put this into stark contrast for Deakin, depending which of our optimistic or pessimistic episodes we're talking about, 21 to 23, it's about a revenue loss of between 640 and 960 million that we would have anticipated getting that we're not going to get. Now, Deakin's strong enough, it's bold enough, and some of the really difficult decisions that we took this year mean that we can go through a process of saving some and spending more than we earn for a while to navigate this well, to do what we do. But you can't ignore that level of change in the organisation.
Absolutely. Thank you, Iain. And Joel, the impact on the arts here, and I'm not just talking about Geelong City, I'm talking right across G21, all those small theatre groups, repertory groups, choirs, music festivals. What's been the impact?
Look, I mean, it's been devastating, like for every other industry. I think one of the things with arts and culture is it is the first impacted, when we know, and it'll be the last to get back to normal in terms of, you know, both small and large events. So we're talking everything from those small community theatre groups, which is really around, you know, getting together and being social and being part of a community, right through to, you know, we at Geelong Arts Centre run Costa Hall in partnership with Deakin. There's a 1,400-seat concert hall there where we get incredible international acts, graduations, all of those incredible community gatherings. So that's been really, really tough. And I think that the impact on artists themselves, that, you know, we've heard a lot about the gig economy and people living from gig to gig that don't have that safety network in terms of being supported. So we have, you know, the word absolutely of the year surely has got to be pivot, and we're sick of, you know, I think we're all sick of pivoting. And I was saying before, pivoting is one word, but it's also a hamster in a wheel, and just we keep planning and going again. We moved online pretty quickly. We really wanted to focus on getting money directly to artists, keeping our staff meaningfully employed. But I mean, like others, we had to make tough decisions. We stood down 100 casual staff. We were lucky enough through the support of the state government to get a lot of those back to work. But we can't understate the effect on artists and the fact that a lot of them really have fallen through the cracks in terms of that support. So optimistic about next year, and I'm sure we'll talk about a little bit more some of the outdoor events and that sort of stuff. I think we can and will bounce back. It's in our DNA, you know, in terms of artists. It really is in our DNA and our desire to connect. So optimistic about next year, but also critically aware of the really tough impact it's had on so many tens of thousands of people. Yeah,
and just on that point, Joel, is there a danger that we might see a cohort of potential artists and performers who just won't return to the industry because of this year?
Look, I mean, I think it'd be naive to say that wouldn't be an effect. But, you know, many artists, many independent artists in particular, have been working 2 or 3 jobs for generations, you know, to support themselves. So their livelihoods and income have been directly affected. I've had artists that I spoke to that, you know, overnight they were sitting there and their phone was just, they said they had to hide their phone because 2 years worth of work, you know, their full-time livelihood was gone within 24, 48 hours. And then we rang to say, can you come and do a live stream? And it was the first, you know, $500 that they were going to earn in months. So look, I think it's tough, but I think that we, as always, we will artists will survive, and it's in their DNA and that desire to connect with people. I don't think that they'll be beaten down from people.
Let's hope not. Back to you, Felicia. You mentioned earlier the impact of domestic travel and how important that can be whilst we wait for international visitors to come back. And here in Geelong, we are awaiting the arrival of the Spirit of Tasmania in 2022 to be birthing here, just across the Corrina Quay. We've also seen the establishment of a new authority for the Great Ocean Road and significant state government funding there. Are these the sorts of initiatives you're hoping to see from government, or are you hoping for even more?
Look, it's a great start. We can always hope for more, can't we? That's part of what we do. Before I launch into that, I'm going to share a little word with you, Joel, because I refuse to say pivot. After about, I think it was May, I had just a gut full of pivot. So I'm gifting you reimagine, Joel.
Thank you.
You can reimagine things.
For a new word, reimagine. Yeah, we'll do that.
Or pirouette.
Yeah, pirouette.
In the arts world, you should love that. You reimagine every day.
Absolutely.
I guess back to the heart of the question, and it's really, I loved seeing the Spirit of Tassie coming in there. I mean, in my history, of course, I ran Tourism Tasmania for 5 years down in Hobart and became very intimately involved with the destination. So there is huge opportunity there, enormous opportunity for Geelong in becoming the birth, if you will, for the Spirit of Tas coming over. One of the things, and I know I'm not talking out of school because I have mentioned this to Justin Giddings, because in my days when I was in Tasmania, I thought there was a huge opportunity to do a fly sale kind of idea. I know firsthand that a lot of people love the idea of getting on the ship. I have to be careful. I call it a boat, and I've been corrected many times. It's a ship. But getting on the ship as you embark on the journey, but coming back again, it's a long haul that second time round. So the idea of doing a sail down and a fly back, or a sail up and a fly back, I think has huge opportunity, and in which case obviously Avalon is a crucial piece in that puzzle. And I mentioned it to Justin in some of the conversations I'm sure that you guys might be having. I do think that there is opportunity to resurrect that idea. I certainly know when I was down in Tasmania, Qantas was very interested in something like that. It does mean obviously you just have to hire a car at the other end, but that's not such a big deal. I think people are used to that anyway. But the concept of sail and fly has merit, and I really do think it's worth having a look at. And I know Justin was actually pretty keen on that idea as well when we spoke. I think with the new authority is frankly something that's long overdue. I have to say I was incredibly surprised when I returned back to Victoria, because I lived for probably about 11 or 12 years in other states across the country. And I was very surprised to find when I got back that really much had not changed along that Great Ocean Road. And I think that has really contributed to the factors that we're seeing in the very small spend per visitor along the road. We've not really advanced in terms of our infrastructure development, our experience development along the road, which has inhibited the growth and the prosperity of the region as a whole. So I think the formation of that new authority is long overdue. I would just hope and pray that what we see is the spirit of collaboration that has been needed for such a long time, the diversification of responsibility for authorising things that was kind of chopped into little pieces all along the road, made it impossible and quite overwhelming for developers or anyone else, even not even down to developers, but even those people looking to enhance the existing products. The hurdles that they had to jump through became just all too hard, and hence we've arrived at where we are. So I think the authority is an enormous opportunity for the region to really realise its value, to pull together on a vision, and to hopefully create an environment that can attract the kind of investment and the kind of development that's necessary. And responsible development, I want to stress that. I think that's always been the key in that area, is that the development has to respect the sensitivities of that region, and indeed the great value that as a country we place on that stretch of road. But we have to continue to think about how we move the whole thing forward, and we have lost ground. We've lost ground to many of those other iconic destinations around the country, because we have not kept pace with the expectations of the consumer and the visitors to the region.
Okay, thank you, Felicia. Back to you, Iain. You've talked about the hard figures, the financial figures affecting Deakin. At the end of the day, a lot of people think, well, we go to university for an education.
Yes.
What has the impact been on students and lecturers? Because there's also been discussion about this has been a year perhaps for primary and secondary students in Victoria who might not have received as good an education as they might have got in a normal year. Are you seeing any trends like that in the university sector?
So I'm really going to confine my remarks to Deakin. So since 1974, Deakin's had a pedigree in distance education that's morphed from stuffing envelopes full of photocopies through to really leading edge digital delivery. And that served us incredibly well when we went through the major transitions earlier this year. It's still had to result in a whole lot of innovation to think about how we do things online that we hadn't really thought you'd have to. A lot of thinking about assessment and examination as to how you do that. The students, to their credit, have engaged with this within Deakin, have come with us on the journey. It's not been without its bumps, that's inevitable, but they've understood, they've worked with us, they've adapted. And to the credit of our student and staff community, we evaluate the results every trimester. So we have 3 teaching periods a year. We've done 2. We're now in the 3rd one, which runs through to early 2021. Somewhat amazingly, which is a tribute to everybody, those teaching evaluations have gone up and measures of student success have gone up this year. You might say, why? Well, I think there's probably been more engagement and sense of community and we're in this together, but also the local innovation, local adaptation to solve challenges has come through writ large, and we want to make sure we keep that going. Now, that's not to say there haven't been huge challenges. So I look at our student community. Many of them have lost part-time jobs that kept them going. Our international students really were left in a very, very tricky position in March and April. And I do just want to call out some of the local communities around here who've rallied and provided a lot of support for those students through there. But it has been hard work, and clearly it's been incredibly hard for many of our staff. They've had to adapt. They've had to do what we've all done, which live from that home office, from the kitchen table, balance family. The number of meetings you have with 3-year-olds sitting on laps is interesting, and you know everybody's pets now because they intervene in meetings.
The cat jumps on the keyboard.
Yeah, but look, it's been tough. I think there's a lot that we've learnt that we'll keep, but I think it has also really been a year where we've had ways of delivery that take out the importance of place. And actually, it's really enforced just how important place is in what we do. And looking forward, we want to make sure that we do digitally what's best done digitally, but we bring back as much campus activity as we can so that when you're on campus, it's really adding value. Education, research, innovation, and the important 3rd pillar of the community engagement, what we do with Joel's organisation and many other organisations, we can't wait to get back.
Fantastic, fantastic. And speaking of your engagement with Joel, Joel, you're in the process, as I mentioned earlier, $128 million build over the road. Have you been adjusting plans in lieu of COVID since that was first mooted, and how confident are you of getting audiences back quickly enough to start filling your indoor spaces there?
Look, I think it's been pretty extraordinary what we've been able to achieve remotely in terms of design of an incredible facility that is taking place across the road. I think the investment of it's nearly $170 million in the facility, so $128 million in this stage, is extraordinary, and I think it's a real investment in this region, in the G21 region. It also speaks to the importance of place and the importance of sharing with through community. So look, absolutely challenging, but I think we took this opportunity. We'd always forecast that in 2021 that we would close some of our venues while we build. So we were able to sort of fast track some of those plans. The fact that it makes me happy to see across the road the hoardings up, the demolition started, so it's real. It's absolutely happening. In terms of have we adapted the design to look at the effects of COVID, I think that's a really interesting question that everyone's grappling with. I mean, same with tourism as well, and with other industries. how much do we change fundamentally who we are and what we do in our respective industries in response to COVID. Our brief that when I came on board, we looked at what an arts centre of the future needs to be. How do you make sure that cultural institutions are relevant? And I've had a personal interest in the digital realm and how that works anyway. So quite luckily, before COVID, that was an interest of mine. I think that our brief was challenging the notion of a black box theatre, challenging this notion of when you go to a performance that you shut the doors to the world. So our brief, luckily, already was about how do we open up into this cultural precinct? How do you not turn your back on the world? And how do you engage with, in Geelong in this context, it's an amazing cultural precinct. We've got the library, we've got the gallery, we've got this incredible cultural precinct that exists. So our brief is about opening up. When you start to see some of those designs, the doors open of the theatre space open into the civic realm. So we've got lots of really beautiful, flexible spaces. So the way that people share live performance has changed irreversibly. And if we don't change that relationship between the art and the audience, then there's an opportunity there to really change the way that we open up. So I think, I'm really excited about sharing those plans. It's happening, and I think it's going to be an exceptional facility.
Fantastic. There are many more questions I could ask the three of you, but unfortunately time is against us, and we're already running over time, for which I apologise, folks, but I think it's been a very worthwhile discussion, and I thank the three of you for contributing your time to our forum here today. Iain, Joel and Felicia, thank you so much.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you, Geoff.
Folks, now we move on to a presentation by Daryl Pelchen, who's the director and co-founder of CORA, and he's going to tell us about the project showcase of the CORA Elite Sports Training and Tourism Complex, which I'm really looking forward to learning all about.
Thank you, Geoff, and to G21 for the opportunity to briefly explain the CORA project, what it is and what it means to this region. CORA will provide a new model for sport in Australia, and it will monetise the tourist visitation to this region. During its construction, it will provide more than 1,000 jobs, and it will contribute $1.6 billion to the local economy. Once it's operational, CORA will provide an additional 700 jobs on site and as many as 350 jobs off-site. It'll utilise the world's largest media agency to promote this region every day to the rest of the world. It has 4 key drivers: technology, wellness, and sustainability and social purpose. I hope in the video that you're about to see, it's clearly evident what makes CORA work. Thank you.
A sports facility worth hundreds of millions of dollars is being planned on a farm near the Surf Coast.
There's a really amazing Surf Coast project that's going to be announced by the state government today. It's the CORA development. And as part of it, there'll be a big sports hub aimed at attracting the world's biggest stars. Daryl Pelchen is the co-founder of CORA. Daryl, good morning. So what is CORA?
CORA is a sport and tourism facility. It'll be the first of its type in the Southern Hemisphere, and Virginia, it's big, and it's proudly big, and it's proud to actually promote brand Australia.
We like to describe CORA as Australia's place of amazing combinations. CORA is about wellness. It combines elite sporting facilities, a sports science and education hub, accommodation, retail and cultural precincts. Located near Australia's famous Surf Coast. There are actually 5 elite sporting facilities in the world.
They are literally all in the Northern Hemisphere, and there's a true need, there's an authentic need for one to be in the Southern Hemisphere.
Multiplex has built a number of high-profile elite sporting precincts and facilities over the course of its history. This sort of facility, state-of-the-art, innovative precinct, is something that is very exciting for our business to be involved with.
We've believed in this project from day one.
When you talk about the facility that's being proposed, it's world-class. It's got such unique facilities, it's a beautiful environment. So what this does do, it provides us as a nation with a facility that gives us the best chance to achieving the highest level.
Every nation or every sports team is looking just for that competitive edge.
How do you get your hand on the wall before somebody else does, or cross the finish line before someone else does?
The best teams have the combination of both mental and physical preparation, as well as the best facilities behind them.
When I was growing up, we never had that same level of sports science. Be able to go to a facility and say, well, here's going to be the climate, here's going to be the humidity. You can actually train and work in a facility like that. We'd never thought that such a facility could ever exist.
Sport has an important role in supporting community priorities, the way sport can increase aspiration, the way sport can change behaviour, but also the way in which sport and culture can become a driver for economic growth.
CORA was conceived as a true community asset. We'd like to curate what the local artists and craftspeople have to offer.
I think CORA creates a really exciting opportunity to showcase some of the produce in the region and people being able to access that local, clean, chemical-free produce.
These are essential to the sustainability of the environment. My vision for CORA is to set up a central educational centre so that groups could come and learn about bees.
CORA will be an opportunity for people to be well, to get well, to also lift their health to the next level in this incredible setting.
It's the open space, it's the quality of ingredient, it's the quality of the lifestyle, and really that's what makes Australia thrive.
Those artisans can be on site and people can meet the maker. Whether you're watching bread being baked in the bakery or whether you're in the VR studio training your golf swing, there is literally something for everyone in the family to do.
When I first got the call, I started to think this is seriously big. On the fact that it's 220 hectares means that you can actually put some really significant facilities in that setting and still give the landscape priority.
I grew up in Geelong and I've been telling stories about this area for many years. This region around Mount Meyrick formed from the hot breath of hundreds of volcanoes, and these eruptions turned the Western Plains into some of the most fertile land in the world. But just as rich as that soil is the history of the people of this region, the Wadawurrung. CORA will be a place for everyone to come to and immerse themselves in the amazing stories of this region.
The site has enormous history. A conservation zone, there will be nothing happening other than restoration.
This facility has the potential to use elite sport to make a difference through a global, inclusive, sustainable and intelligent project.
How exciting is that? Thank you so much, Daryl, for your presentation, and we wish you all the very best as you continue to develop your ideas. Now I'd like to introduce the CEO of G21, Elaine Carbines, who is about to present her CEO report and also her swan song, an overview of her last decade with G21, and what a fabulous period it's been, and welcome, Elaine.
Thank you very much, Geoff, for that very kind introduction. I'd like to firstly, as I always do, acknowledge the traditional owners of the land upon which we are meeting here today, the Wadawurrung people, and pay my respects to their elders, past, present and emerging. What a beautiful welcome to country from Corrina this morning, and also the launch of the Healthy Country Plan. I was proud to be able to host that today, so thank you. And thank you to everyone who registered online to attend the forum, over 500 guests. We're very appreciative of your attendance. I wanted to start by looking at a couple of slides that I showed a year ago at our 2019 G21 Forum. And if we have a look at the headlines from some of our local press last year, when our region was actually booming, we were talking about international flights at Avalon, we were talking about Deakin expanding its capabilities. We were talking about becoming a city of design, very exciting. Over to the next slide, and we saw also lots of people moving to our region, making the G change. We saw a vision to have fast rail between Melbourne and Geelong, and we knew that our property market was going through the roof. We were growing at 2.5%. And then the icing on the cake, in March last year, the next slide, we saw the culmination of 3 or 4 years of work at G21 to secure a city deal for our region, for Geelong and the Great Ocean Road, a $370-odd million city deal between the federal, state and local government. And this, focusing on the visitor economy, is going to invest in our much awaited convention centre, implement the Shipwreck Coast Master Plan, redevelop the Queenscliff Ferry Terminal, Point Grey, access to Deakin Warren Ponds campus, redevelop Apollo Bay Harbour, and also revitalise parts of our CBD around the cultural precinct. So it was fair to say we ended last year on a very, very optimistic note. Our next slide shows that our board identified 12 investment priorities, which we'll see on the next slide. And you can see that many of those priorities are infrastructure priorities needed to really cater and serve the growing population in our region. And it was interesting to hear Kate Meyrick from Urbis talk about the need for connectivity and to become a lot less car-dependent region. And that's been an area of focus for us. But you can see here investment across a broad spectrum of priorities for our region, and importantly also addressing disadvantage for the region. So we started the year very optimistically. Business as usual, we're going to go after investment for these priorities. We were in Canberra early in March with the CEOs, meeting the departmental secretaries. And then, of course, next slide, COVID hits our region. And here's some headlines from the Geelong Advertiser and other local newspapers this year. Really, no one expected this, and it's had a devastating effect on our economy. At G21, we had to quickly alter the way we work. So we, from March this year, mid-March, all of our staff have worked from home, and we're still predominantly working from home. Our board has met virtually, as have our pillar groups, and our staff meetings have been held via Zoom. So we've learnt new technology that most of us had never heard of before. Over the page, we can see that homelessness on the rise. We can see the joblessness really escalating in the region. Deakin losing 400 jobs. The anxiety rate in the region had incredibly lifted. And we had to start to think about how are we going to work differently. So normally we would have travelled to Canberra with the board, met with the Prime Minister, lead the opposition, advocated for investment in our projects. We had to think about how we were going to advocate for much needed infrastructure and investment differently. So in June, we worked with peak bodies from across the region, including the Chamber of Commerce, the Manufacturing Council, Tourism Greater Geelong, the Bellarine, the City of Greater Geelong and the Committee for Geelong to formulate a joint statement. We thought rather than all working individually, COVID had made us work together, and we released this joint statement about the investment priorities that were needed to really kickstart our economy again and create jobs, and many of them were those G21 priority projects. In October, we released a joint budget submission that we lodged with the Treasurer, Tim Pallas, and again it focused on the necessary investment to drive an economic recovery of this region. Things like the duplication of the track between South Geelong stations and Warm Pond. Bring that money forward. Bring forward the money for the City Deal projects. Finish off GMHBA Stadium. Give money to the new Great Ocean Road Authority. Excuse me. fund the Northern Aquatic and Community Hub, make sure that when the Spirit of Tasmania arrives in 2 years, that we actually have improved access and egress from the Port of Geelong. So, if we look now at what has been committed to our region over the last 2 to 3 years, it's in excess of $6 billion worth of funding. That's an enormous amount of funding, and in a year when unprecedented is a word that's overused, that is unprecedented funding. So if we look at the funding success that we've received from the city deal, elections and the 2020 budgets from the federal and state governments, we can see that a vast array of our priority projects have been funded. Addressing disadvantage, we were absolutely stoked to see money in the state budget for social housing, and we know that over $200 million will come to our region. Polar Bay Harbour, funded in the city deal. Our growth areas, Armstrong Creek, money coming out of state election for schools and a CFA station. Further implementation of the Central Geelong Action Plan through the city deal. Our much needed convention centre, $171 million. That has been talked about for about 20 years here in Geelong, and to finally see the money is fabulous. Improving our roads, duplicating the Barwon Heads Road into Geelong. Finally, the last $40 million piece of jigsaw to redevelop Stage 5 of GMHBA Stadium. Money for the Great Ocean Road, over $300 million in the state budget. Money to redevelop the Geelong Arts Centre, and so on. Most importantly, money to really, I suppose, increase the frequency and the travel time of trains between Geelong and Melbourne. And we've seen $4 billion committed by the federal and state governments to ensure that project happens. So fabulous success from the advocacy, joint advocacy that has taken place this year. Many of you know, though, that this year is my last year at G21, and I wanted to reflect a little on the last 10 years. I'd like to thank the successive boards for having the confidence in me to lead G21 over the last 10 years. I've absolutely loved the role. It's been fantastic for me professionally. I've enjoyed so much the work and the hundreds of people that I've met in the role. When I first started 10 years ago, my goal was to work very hard and make our 5 councils really proud that they had the foresight and vision nearly 2 decades ago to decide to work together as a region. I've always seen the role of G21 as a cheer squad for our region, and I'm very proud for all that has been achieved for the region over the last 10 years. 10 years ago, we had a population of around 270,000 people in our region, and today our population is over 340,000 people. So planning for the inevitability of growth has been a key part of our work at G21 to ensure that as we grow, we do not compromise the very thing that we all love about our region, its livability. We've been very successful in attracting state and federal government investment to provide much needed infrastructure, as evidenced by the funding commitments consistently made over the last 10 years for our priority projects. It'd be a mistake, though, to think that that was easy, that it was always going to happen. It wasn't. It's been hard work of our 5 councils working together, led by our board, travelling to Canberra many times, meeting with the Prime Minister, meeting with the opposition leader, meeting with the Premier, the opposition leader, to ensure that when it comes time to dole out their money, they've got our region first in mind. I'm also very proud of the socially progressive policy initiatives we have pioneered in our region, especially when it comes to addressing disadvantage. GROW, the G21 Region Opportunities for Work project, is a shining example of how our region works at its best. We work together to maximise the opportunity for all members of our community to benefit from the prosperity that our region has begun to enjoy over the last 5 years. GROW is a great example of innovative public policy that was born here at G21 in conjunction with the Give Where You Live Foundation and has now been replicated by the state government across regional Victoria. And we know from the recognition that G21 has achieved across the state, nationally and internationally, from when the OECD studied us some years ago, that we have something very special here that is the envy of other regions. I've always said that G21 is the sum of all of its parts, and it's not about one person. Thank you to everyone that has contributed to our success over the last 10 years by being a board member, a member organisation, a member of one of our pillars, by attending our forums, by participating in our consultation processes, and by supporting our work. Your collective efforts have made a difference. I'd especially like to acknowledge and thank my staff. They're very, very talented people, incredibly loyal and incredibly committed to working to progress the region. So that's Nada, Zoe, David, Lauren, Kate, Liz, Angie, Roger and Deb. So as I leave, a new era commences and I wish G21 much success. I'll look on with much interest as you build on the very strong regional foundation that we have established here in the G21 region. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Thanks, Elaine, and on behalf of everyone here, thank you for your incredibly professional approach to leading G21 over the last 10 years. It's been an absolute delight to work with you, as I have done during part of that period. Folks, that brings us almost to the end of today's proceedings. I apologise again for running a little bit over time, but I'm sure you have benefited from the extra content that we have crammed into a very busy and very stimulating morning of discussion, ideas and future thinking for this fabulous region that we live in. It's now my great honour to introduce, to formally close today's event, the newly elected Chair of the G21 Board, Councillor Stephanie Asher. Welcome, Stephanie.
Thank you very much, Geoff, for that kind introduction. What an informative and diverse G21 forum we've just witnessed. So many ideas, suggestions and observations to ponder. And like so many events this year, the forum was different in format to previous years. However, once again, the forum was thought-provoking, making us think laterally about the future of our amazing region. Despite the frustratingly harsh year that 2020 has been for many, I think we'd all agree that our region is very well positioned to launch strongly into 2021. I'm certainly feeling extremely optimistic. And here at G21, we are positioning to continue to play a vital role in shaping that bright future as we all recover from the impact of COVID-19. I'd like to pay tribute to the work of outgoing CEO Elaine Carbines, who has chosen to retire from this role after a very impressive 10 years. G21 has evolved as a fierce advocate for the region, and in large part that is due to Elaine's leadership and drive. On behalf of the board, I thank Elaine for her commitment and wish her very well with her new ventures. I'm sure it's not retirement, and I think Port Douglas is in there somewhere as a little very well-earned break. I would also like to thank Bill Mithen for his leadership of G21 over the last 4 years as chair. Bill provided great commitment and support to the organisation in the role. Now, I know that forums like today's don't just happen, and I would like to thank the presenters, the sponsors, the technical experts and the talented and dedicated G21 staff for pulling this together. The fact that it looked easy is testament to all the hard work that went on behind the scenes. And importantly, I'd also like to thank you. Whether you've been viewing on the video on stream or listening to the broadcast on the Pulse, thank you. Your support and interest of G21 is very greatly appreciated. We look forward to your company again at next year's forum, which hopefully will be back to a face-to-face full-length forum. And as we've heard from the Urbis presentations today, the region is particularly well positioned on the national stage to continue to be a regional powerhouse. So next year there should be even more great news. G21 and its 5 member councils have played a significant role in getting the region to that place. And I intend to ensure that G21 continues to provide regional coordination and leadership during my time as G21's chair and as Mayor of Geelong. And finally, on behalf of the G21 board and staff, have a very safe and enjoyable festive season. Thank you.